I'm delighted to see so many people in a late semester, late Thursday event. I'm Harriet Murav, professor of Slavic and professor of comparative and world literature and president of the Campus Faculty Association, and I'm delighted to be one of the co-hosts of this event with our speaker, Howard Bunsis, whom I'll introduce in a few minutes. This event is the product of our fabulous new partnership between Campus Faculty Association, American Federation of Teachers, Illinois Federation of Teachers, and last but certainly not least, the American Association of University Professors, the AUP. I'd like to thank AUP, IFT, AFT for their joint sponsorship of this presentation. And before I introduce our speaker, Professor Howard Bunsis, I'd like to say a few words about collective bargaining and the mission of the Campus Faculty Association. A print version of this brief excerpt that I'm going to share with you is available at the table just outside the door. CFA, Campus Faculty Association, aims to create an open and democratic university by balancing the power of administration with a strong faculty voice through an open process of collective bargaining. We respect the values of a merit-based, research-oriented university and our core missions of outstanding teaching and service to the people of this state of Illinois, the nation, and the world. CFA strongly supports the ideal of shared governance, and in that spirit, we are and we will continue to work for transparency in all budgeting and decision-making processes. And it's the budgeting that you're going to be hearing about from our speaker, Professor Howard Bunsis. Our goal at CFA is to create a faculty union that includes tenure stream, teaching staff, and lecturers. A union will enable us to continue to have access to professionals like Howard Bunsis and access to the in-depth financial analysis that we're about to hear. A union working together in partnership with the Faculty Senate would provide the transparency and openness that is so sorely lacking at present. As a union working with the Faculty Senate, we could push back against the trends that Professor Bunsis identifies as, for example, the number and pay for administrators has increased over the past 5 years, while the number and comparable pay for faculty has declined, while tuition and class size have increased significantly. As a union, we would not be limited to the role of mere advice and consent. Our voice would actually have impact. As a union, we would have access to the significant important lobbying power of organizations like AFT in Springfield. If you're interested in finding out more about CFA and our current efforts, if you're interested in adding your voice in support of our mission statement, just step outside the door and there's a sign-up sheet and the mission statement available for you to sign. Furthermore, Megan McLaughlin's extensive analysis of the growth in administrators and their salaries will shortly be available on the CFA website. One more note before I introduce the very patient Howard Bunsis. You are invited to join us afterwards for wine, beer, and snacks at the Bread Company. And now I'd like to finally turn to our speaker, Howard Bunsis, patient Howard Bunsis, who I note will take questions throughout his presentation, unlike most other speakers. So do bear that in mind. You can interrupt with a question. Howard Bunsis received his undergraduate degree in accounting from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania in 1981. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, my dates are even older. You're a young'un. You're a young'un. He was, you know. He received his JD degree from Fordham Law School in 1984, his MBA from the University of Chicago in 1987, and his PhD in accounting from the University of Chicago in 1993. He is currently treasurer of the Eastern Michigan University chapter of the AAUP, the secretary-treasurer of the National AAUP, and the chair of the Collecting Bargaining Congress of the AAUP. In addition, he holds an academic appointment as professor of accounting at Eastern Michigan University. And now I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming Professor Howard Bunsis.
Well, thank you for that introduction. It's great to be back in Illinois. As I lived here for 6 years in Hyde Park. When I lived there, Barack Obama doesn't live all that far from where I used to live. The neighborhood is not the same. I'll just leave it at that. It was a little different when I was there. We would live there, but it's great to be back as a former Illinois resident. I really appreciate the opportunity. Now, a couple of ground rules. First off, this presentation will be made available online as soon as we're done, so you all could have the whole thing. Secondly, as I talk, I'm a teacher just like you guys. Whenever you feel like interrupting, just raise your hand or shout out, whatever method you want, and we'll get through it. Now, there's 130-something slides. I'm not going to get through all of them. So if I'm going quickly, if I skip over some, just understand, first of all, you'll have access to it, but understand that we just can't get through everything. This is a big place. It's a big, complicated place, so it takes a lot to get through everything. But I think we'll get through it, and we have to talk about the system, because you are part of a system, like it or not. And I think the not part may be more prevalent, but that's just the way it is. And we'll certainly spend a lot of time analyzing your specific university. In general, in terms of a summary, many people believe the university is in poor state, poor financial condition because of the state, but it's simply not the case. The university is in strong financial condition. That is a definitive fact, as we'll demonstrate. We have external evidence to support it, not just my words, the words of the university itself in their audited statements, and the external bond ratings of the system are very strong. So we have external evidence to support this conclusion. And just be clear, the UI system and UIUC, not the same as the state of Illinois, in much better shape. The state is a factor, but is not the factor in determining the financial condition of your university. I think we'll be able to demonstrate there has been a declining commitment to the core academic mission, an increasing commitment to the number and compensation of administrators. Tuition is going up significantly. Any students in the room? You guys, I understand the deal here with tuition. As an undergrad, you sign on, you get a 4-year deal. But as we look long term, we've seen significant increases in tuition, and we've also seen significant increases in class size. So, in my view, fewer full-time faculty, students are paying more and getting less. And we'll demonstrate that. In terms of data, I'm not going to go through all these. It takes a lot. There's a lot of different data sources we use. A lot from inside the audited financial statements of the system. And this here is the Division of Management Information here at UIUC. I'd say these two are the sources I use the most, followed closely by what's called here the Orange Book. Some of you may be familiar with this. Yes? Or you just kind of look at it and forget it. The Orange Book is the budget for all 3 campuses. And it goes on from there. So let's talk about budgets. And just think about what your vision is or what your conception is of what a budget. And I just want to make sure we have 2 different concepts in mind. We have the audited financial statements, and then we have the budget. They are not the same thing. A budget is a plan. We're looking towards the future. And the biggest advantage is they're timely. In fact, the budget for the year we're in right now, the year that started July 1/11 and will end 6/30/12, that budget is out there and is being used. What's being debated now is the budget for the 12-13 year, the year that starts July 1/12 and ends 6/30/13. So budgets are much more timely. The best thing about actual audited financial statements, it's not a plan, it reports what actually happened. So we have that advantage. And I think what we hear a lot about is budget shortfalls and budget holes, and we're left with nothing but bad options. And I think we could maybe have a different perspective on all that. One thing on timing, the bad thing about the financial statements is The most recent ones we have are for the year ended 6/30/10. Now, having said that, the ones for the year ended 6/30/11, I think they'll be ready. If they're not ready now, they'll be publicly available within several weeks. The administration probably has them. The last year's was signed off on right about now in December of 2010, so it's likely that this year's will be signed off on as well, and I think the administration should share these statements with the whole community as soon as possible. The budget, as we talked, the budget request is available, and the budgets that we're using are available. And in terms of, we'll see if those budgets determine if the administration has been true to the core academic mission. Previews, they haven't been, and I think we'll be able to demonstrate that. And in essence, we have competing narratives. In the 2013 budget request, which is a very long document, the administration paints, in my view, a very bleak picture of the finances of the UI system, citing again and again and again the poor financial condition of the state and how this endangers quality, etc. However, the actual financial statements, the words, the outside bond ratings, and analysis suggest a totally different picture. And we're going to focus on the priority issue. In other words, under the current budget, is this university administration committed to the core mission itself? And let me start with some numbers. We are going to end at about 5:20 because we have a 10-minute quiz at the end. So, I'm joking. All right, now, I'm not going to go through, I have a lot on the system here, and I want to spend more time with you here on UIUC than the system. But at some level, I have to introduce the system. We can't say, oh, that's the system and that's them and we're us. You need to see both. You need to see what's going on and how UIUC fits in. So the system, of course, includes UIC, UIUC, UIS, and then the central administration at some level. Just what you see here, this says amounts in thousands. So if I go to the 2010 column and I see this number here, 5541122, that means the UI system has $5.5 billion of assets. Liabilities, about half that. How do I know about half that? That's what this percentage is. This 50%, where my arrow is here, is this numerator and this denominator. Net assets, this is what we call them in the not-for-profit world. In the for-profit world, we call that owner's equity or shareholder's equity. In this world, in the non-profit world, we call them net assets, simply the difference. And what you see in this percentage, it went down here, suffered a little here, and now was increased. 2010 was an exceptional year for the UI system in terms of profit and growth in reserves. My guess is that 2011 was every bit as good. We'll find out in a couple of weeks for sure, but I'd be willing to bet that this percentage, when we look at 2011, this percentage will be higher because the university, the system had a very good year. Now, the university has all these organizations called UROs, university-related organizations. It's a complex place. There's a lot of other stuff that the university does besides just what happens here on this campus. Moody's and other credit rating agencies, they consider everything when they look at the bond ratings. And this next page just has a summary of all the ones. The ones that matter, the biggest one, of course, is the UI Foundation. $1.2 billion of assets, and we'll see what those assets are. It's mostly stocks and bonds and things of that nature. And typically they spend 5% of those assets on good stuff, on academic programs, scholarships, things of that nature. These are just assets. And on the next, to follow up your question, on the next slide, these are just the assets. The liabilities of the UROs are very small. They don't issue debt. The way debt is issued here, UIUC does not issue debt separately. Everything is issued through the system. But the UROs themselves they don't have any, shall we call, bonds payable or public debt. They have some account payable and things like that. But on this slide, to answer your question, when you look at these assets, that's really, the assets and the net assets are almost exactly the same. And you can see the dip. This dip here is the stock market. You can see what a significant dip it was, but things have picked up again. 2011 was a pretty good year, so this will likely be higher. When we combine the two, we combine the system and the UROs, we see a growth in assets. Liabilities, we saw an increase in liabilities. University borrowed a couple $100 million in 2008, ostensibly to support capital projects and things of that nature. They have not borrowed money to meet payroll or meet operating expenses. That has not happened here. The borrowing of money has been for specific projects. And you see this nice increase in net assets. And if you want to know where the assets are, just to give you a sense of it, this distinction between unrestricted and restricted cash, just think of it as someone gives money. Someone donates money to the university and says, you know what, you can never, ever, ever spend this principal. And the university must abide by that. Now, what can the university do? They could spend, obviously, the interest or income from that gift, but a lot of the cash is restricted. But still, when you look at the cash and investments and you add these up, that's $2.5 billion in cash and investments. Now, I think a big problem was what's highlighted in yellow. I think that really has created a tremendous problem here in the state, not just here at UIUC, but throughout the state. And that's when the state decided to withhold some of the appropriation in 2010, and they've done a little of that since. Now, they did pay the whole thing back, but when a state the size of Illinois decides not to pay their obligations and says, we'll pay you later, that creates issues. And as we'll see, I actually think that action has led to more concern and angst than anything else that's gone on, is the state withholding the payment, suggesting that the state is absolutely and completely broke. Well, the state is not broke, but as we'll see, we're going to go over the state. The state is not in good shape. In fact, it has the lowest bond rating of any of the 50 states in this country, including my wonderful state of Michigan. Everyone thinks we're the lamest state of all time, but don't worry, you guys are worse. We have a higher unemployment rate. The simple reason is the pension problem, and we'll talk about that as well. The public pension problem here. In Michigan, many of the public employees, myself included, I may add, we're no longer on defined benefit plans, we're on defined contribution plans. They want to move you in this direction. They moved us, and not all of us, but they moved many of us years ago. In Illinois, as you think, I think there's a movement to push the state employees in that direction as well. And that is why, I think that's the number one reason why the state is in the shape it's in. Now, in terms of reserves, when you look at these net assets, there's a lot of different categories of net assets, and I'm not going to bore you with the details. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 categories of net assets. Just bear with me, I know I'm going ahead, but I'm showing you a nice picture, okay? There's 4 categories of net assets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Basically, 2 of them count and 2 of them don't in terms of reserves. The ones that don't count is this box, invested in capital assets. That's the value of this building, for example, less any debt associated with it. The reason it doesn't count towards reserves or it doesn't improve financial flexibility of the university, there's no way the university is about to sell this building. Because if they sold the building, that means, well, they're going to be out of business. So, and there's a lot of money in here. I think this is the largest category of net assets, and we don't include it at all in analyzing the reserves of the UI system of the institution because it doesn't represent any financial flexibility. Now, these guys have 2 categories, restricted. You hear the word restricted a lot. And restricted has what's called non-expendable. These are a lot of the donations that are given that say you can't touch the principal, money that is set aside. But these is money set aside. Let's say the university sets aside money for future debt payments. They borrow a bunch of money, and prudently what they say, you know what, we want to make sure that we can pay off the principal and interest on this debt. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a fund. And in this fund is going to include all the future principal and interest payments. And we can't touch it. We cannot touch that fund for anything, not for faculty salaries, not for student needs, not for anything. We can't touch it. Now, just because you can't touch it doesn't mean you're worse off. You're better off having that fund with that money. Just like, let's say you have a mortgage on your house, and you have future principal and interest payments. And let's say you were fortunate enough for that mortgage to have you had a fund that contained every future principal and interest payment you ever had. Are you better off for having that fund? Even though you can't touch it, you're better off having it. And that's the same thing. That's why Moody's and other financial institutions include this category, even though it can't be used freely when analyzing the reserves of a public university. This category, unrestricted, I have a slide here that I passed over. University administrations now claim unrestricted doesn't mean unrestricted. We have set aside money for this. We have some of that unrestricted, we have said it's going into this project. Well, the Board of Trustees may have said that. However, if the auditors, the external auditors, left it in this box, that means the administration and the governing board could undo the decision. Once the decision can't be undone, it leaves this box and goes into one of these boxes. But if they leave it here, that means it's unrestricted. And so we typically add these two, and that's what we do on the next slide. And how big are the reserves here? Well, we need a denominator. Everything in life needs a denominator. How big is the number 7? Well, it depends, 7 compared to what? And so this university has reserves of $1.3 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but maybe not. If you're comparing to the U.S. government, it doesn't sound like much at all. So we compare it to total expenses. And the total expenses of this place is a $4.6 billion a year operation. And I don't care where you're from, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money coming through the system. And so we create what's called a primary reserve ratio. Here's my numerator. Here's my denominator. And you see it's 29%. We're going to see in a second whether that's good or not. But what you do see is that the ratio declined a lot in 2009. And a lot of it is the stock market, as we'll see. But you can see the increase is there. And it's a pretty solid ratio, as we'll see. The next question is, and I've heard this, when you read the university's pronouncements, we have so much debt, we're up to our ears in debt. Have you guys heard this? We just borrowed too much money, we're out of hock. Well, there is a lot of debt. But we compare the debt to reserves, and we have a viability ratio, which has the reserves in the numerator and the debt in the denominator. And we'll see that this ratio is pretty solid. What Moody's writes in their report, which we'll talk about in a second, is the university does have a decent amount of debt, and they're okay as long as they don't go ahead and borrow some new money. So I don't think there's much flexibility in the way of borrowing. But from what I gather, from reading the 12-13 budget request that was sent to the Board of Trustees in September, there's a lot of construction going on around here. There's a lot of construction on this campus, and a lot of that came from the borrowed money that was several years ago. The last ratio that I'll bore you with is called the net income ratio, which is revenues versus expenses. And what you see with this ratio, we take our revenues, we subtract our expenses. Instead of calling it net income or profit, in the for-profit world we call it the change in net assets. And then what do? We take that change in net assets and we put it on top, and we put total revenues on bottom, and we get a ratio called the net income ratio. And you could see bad years in 8 and 9, negative, usually positive in 10. Well, what's driving a lot of this ratio? Unrealized change in value of investments, and I say in parentheses, paper gain / loss. What's a paper gain? You have a bunch of stocks, you don't sell them, the value either goes up or goes down. The university's got, as we showed you, a couple $1 billion in this stuff going around. So significant losses in these unrealized gains here, unrealized losses here, big unrealized gain in 10. And so what I do in the bottom row is take out the paper stuff, and you see everything's a pretty solid and positive. And if you think that's kind of cheesy, oh, he just took out the stuff he didn't like. If you think that's cheesy, we're going to look at cash flows. And we'll see the cash flow evidence. The cash flows of the system are almost exactly this. And I promise we're almost done with the system. Moody's has these ratios, and they give scores to these ratios. And I'll just go right to the scores themselves. And here are the scores, these composite scores for the last 6 years now for the system. The best you could do is 5. High is good, low is bad. 5 is best, 0 is the worst. And the big jump here was because of the change away from the negative stock market result. And I think most important for getting these ratios is what Moody's says themselves. And look at the date. Look at the date on this Moody's rating. June 11th, 2011. That is not that long ago. It seems like years ago, but it's really only a couple of months ago. They assigned an AA2 rating to the University of Illinois and for that system, and they reaffirmed the debt, the other related debt of the university. This is the 3rd highest bond rating out of 23 that Moody's can give. Why did Moody's do this? Well, obviously a lot of it's based on the ratio analysis, but I have highlighted in red on this next slide some of the strengths they talk about. Student demand, prominent research position, operating cash flow. They did talk about negative. The negative is the delay in the state funding, and they use their existing liquidity to fund the unpaid receivables from the state. So they had enough money lying around. Further, to get more specific, again, they talk more specifically about student demand. Obviously, this number is not just UIUC, and will be way, I promise you will be to your home in a second. They talk about research funding, positive cash, balanced operating performance, fundraising success, limited additional debt and capital plans. It's not all good news. The report certainly mentions challenges, moderately high reliance on the state of Illinois, rated A1 with a negative outlook. A1 is the 5th highest rating, but the lowest of any U.S. state. So those are the facts, and that's the number one problem, the delays in funding. Modest but improved financial resource cushion, that's the reserves they're talking about, and debt structure is somewhat high. So those are the challenges that Moody's talked about, but overall, a very strong rating. And in terms of the cash flows, I have 3 lines here. The red is the change in net assets. This is that negative stuff in 08 and 09. The operating cash flows are in green. You can see how positive they are. And this is the change in net assets without the paper gain or loss. So you can see very positive results consistently. And summarizing these ratios, it clearly indicates the university is in strong condition, confirmed by the outside credit rating agencies. It does not mean that the state appropriation is adequate. We're going to show you that the state appropriation, this state has not kept up its commitment to higher education in this state. There is no doubt that the commitment to higher education from the state legislature is not where it needs to be. And we'll focus on the priorities. Now, some further evidence, and these are just because I like having fun with this. The university plays high finance. There's nothing wrong with playing high finance. There's nothing wrong with investing what's called level 3 investments, which are, for lack of a better phrase, the most risky investments there are. Level 1 would be investing in the stock market. Level 2, some funds. And level 3, they're doing a lot in real estate funds. Not quite Bernie Madoff, but in his neighborhood. Level 3 is Bernie Madoff's neighborhood. Hedge funds. There's nothing wrong on the face of it with investing in those funds. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. However, you only do that if you feel pretty good about yourself financially. You don't do that if you're about to go under. You don't do that if you're struggling financially and you can't meet your obligations. You do that when you feel good about yourself, when you have a AA bond rating. That's when you do that. And there's nothing wrong with it, but don't cry poverty and do that. In addition, don't cry poverty and get involved in interest rate swaps. Now, university borrows money. Nothing wrong with borrowing money. They borrow money on a variable rate debt. And they say, you know what, we're going to be conservative here. We don't like variable rate debt because we're afraid of what would happen if interest rates go up. So what do? We swap into fixed payments. Derivatives is not a 4-letter word, and it's not a dirty word. There's nothing wrong with what the university is doing. Again, what they're doing is fine. You don't do this unless you feel good about yourself financially. The more conservative play is to borrow fixed in the first place and don't have to go through the swap market where you have a counterparty who's generally pretty good, someone like JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs. We know how wonderful they all are. And there's nothing wrong with doing so. And the fact that they're losing money on the swaps, well, think about it. The reason they're losing money on the swaps is they swapped out of variable payments when interest rates went down. Now, it's not fair to criticize the administration for that. Who has a crystal ball? I think once you borrow variable, I think the conservative move is to swap into fixed. But why do it in the first place? If you're in so much trouble, don't do it. You only do this, again, you only play this game if you feel good about yourself. You don't play level 3 investments and interest rate swaps unless you feel good about yourself. And they certainly do. So now let's talk UIUC. I told you it wouldn't take that long. And I'll get back to the slide in a second. I have this thing called IPED. I just want to make sure you understand what IPEDS is. It stands for Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, run by the U.S. Department of Education. Every university that gets a dime of federal money or a student gets a dime of federal money has to submit data to IPEDS. Everyone's got to do it. So it's required by the Higher Education Act of 1965, and it's a tremendous source of data for us. And I think what you see in comparing the system, the total UI system, with the others, a couple of things come out. Here at UIUC, there's more reliance on tuition, and there's also more reliance on grants. There's no, UIC's got this big hospital, which is a big source of revenue for them, and you don't have that. The state Now there's notice how I have two different states here. There's a state operating appropriation, and then there's a state appropriation for fringe benefits. And together, the state's about 24% of your revenue base. And slightly higher at the others, but not all that different. So, when we look at the revenue, when we look at a picture in a second, you'll see how important grants and contracts are. Look, this is a pie chart of the UI. This is just UIUC. And this is the 2010 revenue distribution. The big takeaway from this is diversity. It's not just, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You've got grants and contracts, tuition and fees, state appropriation. Now, it's true, and I'll show you how the size of these has changed significantly over time. It used to be the case that the state appropriation used to be a lot bigger than tuition. No longer the case. And I think we're seeing those lines cross, which is unfortunate. This has always been significant for this university. There's a lot of research done here, and there's a lot of grants being done, and there's a lot of activity with the private sector done here, and the public sector in terms of grants and contracts. So so you see a variety of revenue sources. And some of these others, auxiliaries and things like that, auxiliaries, housing, dining, bookstore, and of course the wonderful Department of Intercollegiate Athletics. Don't worry, I am not in line for being a football coach, but that wouldn't be a bad salary to get. I'll just briefly say this. Your guy was getting 1.5, they fired him. The guy at OSU at Ohio State just got 4. So your new guy's getting 2. And I'm up. I don't know the first thing about football, but I'm ready. I'm ready for the job. All right, so, and we talked about the red. Now here's where you see what's really troubling, I think. Here's what's coming from tuition and fees. So this, students in the back, this is your share, this is what you've been paying in terms of the revenue. The state operating appropriation has now gone down in the last 2 years. 6% drop here, another 1% drop for 12. The big increase is the state payments for fringe benefits. So that's why the pension issue really is a problem for this university and for the state. There's no getting around that. The pension issue is really an issue, and it really does hamper things. But you see when these two lines crossed just several years ago, I'm sorry students, it's not going back. But just because it's not going back doesn't mean we still can't stand up for what's right. This is not right, though. This operating appropriation should not be going down. It should be increasing. The state moved in some direction. Your state, as you know, as we'll talk about in a second, increased the income tax rate, which very few states have done, but that was done in January of this year. And hopefully that will alleviate some of the problems. But this is very difficult to deal with, and we'll look more specifically at that. In terms of the revenues over time, just to show you what's going on, the state appropriation declined 6.3 for 11 and declined 1.1 for 12. Those are the assumptions we're using. And tuition revenue, there's two components to tuition revenue going up, right? You have more students, and then you have the dreaded price increase. And last time I looked, there was a little bit of a price increase here each and every year. And the fringe payments are going up significantly as well. Now, what about that stimulus? Have you heard, when the stimulus is over, life ends as we know it? Have you heard this before? Well, stimulus ended in the year we just finished. This is the administration's view of that, and I'll show you a graph they have right from their budget report that looks just like this. Using the scaling, notice the scaling here. Notice how he started at 600 million? So this is their view. The stimulus was huge, and when it went, the operating result, this is what it really happened. This is the truth. We start the scaling at 0. And so the stimulus is a factor, but not, again, but there is no getting around the fact that there was a decline in the state appropriation for higher education in this state in the last 2 years. There's no doubt about that, and it's not appropriate at any level, which is unfortunate. And this comes from, by the way, these next 3 graphs come right from the university's, as you see here, the fiscal year 2013 budget request, September 11th. So I took this right from the university's presentation to the Board of Trustees just a couple of months ago. And you see they did that? So that's their view of the world. But this next graph, I think, is really revealing. It may be hard to see, but that blue line are the fringe payments. That's what's going on. These are the other appropriation kind of things, but those fringe benefit costs are really hurting. And so the state, in terms of their tuition support, is not where it needs to be. And so when I look at iPads, I'm now comparing here 2002 to 2010. Why do I choose those end dates? That's the earliest year iPads has, and 2010 is the latest year they have. So using those two dates, you could see the state appropriation. This was the 2002 percentage. You could see how much lower it is. And look at tuition. Look how much bigger tuition is as a factor. The other factor is not changing as much. Now, one of the things we hear is that the place is in trouble. One way to tell if a firm, a university, are they in trouble? Are revenues going up or down? What are they doing? Are they going up or are they going down? Well, 5 years per iPads, we have revenue. This is UIUC. This is not the system. This is this campus only. 5 years of revenue going up to just over $2 billion for 10. Now, for a lot of what I'm going to do from this point forward, we're using the Orange Book. The Orange Book is the Bible around here, or you should view it that way. And look at the years I have here. I've got 7 to 12. 12 is the year we're in now. And so we're able to use 6 years of data, but going back to 2007. And using this formulation of total revenues, look what's happening. 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. Every year revenues are going up. Okay, there are definitely problems with the state. There's definitely a problem with fringes. But if the world was coming to an end, we wouldn't see this positive slope in that graph. And I'm hoping you guys all understand what positive slope is. I'm praying that that's the case. How about delta? First derivative? Does that help anybody? No? Okay. Second derivative is increasing at an increasing rate, a decreasing rate. Does that help? No? Isn't there a math professor here? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So that's what's going on. And seriously, increasing at an increasing rate is concave, increasing at decreasing is concave, and then convex is increasing at an increasing rate. And these are increasing at a very, very steady rate. Pretty solid increases in revenues. Now, what's going on with enrollment? These are annual changes, and you may look at this right-hand column and say, you know what, the enrollment's not going up that much. When you look over this 10, 11-year period, for a place this size, when you've got 40,000 students, it's hard to increase enrollment more than 1%. I mean, you can't just increase enrollment by 5,000 students. It doesn't work that way. The only way you do that is if you affect the Q word. You know what the Q word is? Quality. And you don't want to do that. That's not what this university is about. And I think, as we'll show you, given degrees conferred, 4-, 5-, and 6-year graduation rates, which we're going to show you, as well as persistent rates, I don't think the quality of students is going down. In fact, I think I'll be able to argue that the quality of the students here has increased over time. Now, some faculty who've been here a long time may disagree with that. I'm just looking in the short term. We definitely see from the numbers an increase in the quality. So there has been no, my point is this increase in enrollment has not been obtained by lowering standards here. The reason it's going up is, I mean, obviously the economy's down and enrollment goes up, but we've seen a steady increase in enrollment over this period. And I broke it down in this next chart by level. And the way it's broken down is professional, which is law and the vet, doctorate, graduate, not doctorate, and then undergrad obviously being the biggest. And you can see in general things are improving. I'll let you stare at this for a while before I flip it so you guys find yourselves in here and the one you're interested in and see what you think. And if you want the numbers behind it, here's the numbers behind the change in enrollment. I took 3 years, and I did 2 sub-periods, right? I got 01, 6, and 11, 5 years apart. So I took 3 different percentage changes, from 1 to 6, from 6 to 11, and then from 1 to 11. And what you see, the undergrad, over the 10-year period, the undergrad enrollment increased 13%, though the increase was bigger in this sub-period than that. By the way, for any of you who know anything about math, you can't just add those percentages to get to that. So don't think those two are supposed to equal that. That's not the way percentages work. Graduate, not doctorate, has gone up. I found this little negative here kind of disturbing. The decline in the number of doctorate students. Well, and this is a doctorate granting institution, and you have less doctorate students over the last 5 years. Any doctoral students here? Yeah, there you go. Well, you're the lucky few who survived, I guess, but that's not so great. And now I have here, and I'll give you some time to look at this. This is broken down by what I call, and I think what is called in the notes, college/curriculum. These aren't all colleges. And whenever, you got to be careful when you do this, especially myself as an outsider. Because, for example, there was no general studies here in 01 and 06, right? According to the enrollment books. And then all of a sudden there is, I think in 07 a little bit, then 08 I think it went into full force, and then there's been, and so if I were just to compare liberal arts and sciences, this number to that number or to that number, I'd see significant declines. But really this is part of, these need to be added together. I understand that 100%. I certainly read about who's in what. But in general, I think that's fair to say. So I don't think it's quite fair. These red numbers, I don't think, do justice to the changes that we see in liberal arts and science. I think these two need to be combined together. And you see some colleges growing faster than others. Let me say this. Be careful about enrollment. It's not, I could tell you from a lot of places I've been, it's the #1 data point that boards of trustees look at in terms of should this program survive or not. They even look at this ahead of degrees conferred, number of majors. They really look at enrollment first and foremost. And there's a lot of factors that affect enrollment, as you know. It's possible that in a particular college or a particular department, your enrollment is going down, but you've actually increased standards and improved the program. So I think my point is, don't be too simplistic about using these numbers here and saying, that's it, these are the bad ones are in red, the good ones are in black. I think that's too simplistic. But still, I think if we're going to talk about the budget and the financial situation at UIUC, you have to know this. You have to know what's, and I know for those, you know, you're all in one particular college or curriculum, but I think you need to know the full picture. Now, and the other reason is, as I'll show you, I think the state is about to peg your appropriation to various metrics. They already passed the bill that says it's going to happen. They haven't said which metrics they're going to be. And one of the ones they talk about is Illinois residents. And that cuts both ways, as you know. But I think what we found is a decline in the percentage of undergrads from Illinois residents. And a lot of people may look at that and say that's a good thing. It's more diversity, et cetera. There's also the, I'll put this gently, out-of-state tuition differential, which maybe you're familiar with. And maybe there's an intentional reason for that, maybe not. I'll let others decide that. The state itself, this is really disturbing. This is the state operating appropriation per student, and you see this really bad decline. So there's no, I mean, when I say the university is in good shape, I mean that, but with the understanding that the state has not kept up their share of the bargain. They simply have not. And this definitely has created some pressures at the university. Now let's talk tuition. Now, I have here, I know you guys are grad students, this is undergraduate resident tuition. The reason we use this, it's the easiest to compare, it's the purest. But as you know, grad tuition and all the other tuitions are pegged off of this one. This is the one the board sets first, and everything else gets pegged off this one. So this is undergraduate resident tuition and mandatory fees, both added in. And these annual changes, the only thing I'll say about these last couple of years, it's better than it was down here. And these are telephone numbers almost here. And remember, we're going to talk about, tuition is two things to students and their families. It's level and it's changes. Once, you know, if you're not in if you're not in one of those, you know, you get a guaranteed 4-year tuition unless you change programs, and you certainly feel it. But the level is really, once you've chosen to come to a place, that's it. Your level is here. Then if you hit with any changes, if it takes you more than 4 years to graduate, and you hit with any changes, you and your family feel that. So we'll compare the tuition, as we do here, to other places. And tuition and fees at the public, now, I'm well aware that this is not the comparable set of groups you're looking at, but we use, you know, people use different sets of peers for different reasons, right? And in terms of tuition, the Illinois Board of Higher Ed, they have selected 3 different peer groups for UIUC in terms of tuition comparables. This is one of them, the Big Ten Conference. And I don't know how many students sit there and say, I'm only going to the Big Ten, and that's it, because of the great football that they play in the Big Ten, or the great basketball they play in the Big Ten. My belief on the number of people that do that is close to 0, but maybe I'm wrong. And I know students care about sports at some extent, but this is an 11-year change. You could see Illinois has got the highest change over this time period, though the level of tuition is below Penn State, and keep your jokes to yourself about Penn State. All right, public AAU institutions. You guys know what AAU, these are the 34 or so research institutions, and UIUC has the 3rd highest among this group. It was 7th highest in 2000. And lastly, the peer group that we're going to use for faculty salaries, because that's what IBHE uses, is, and this, it's really, I'm not so sure what a fair comparison this is. These are obviously all private universities. So for those of you who, undergraduate students, who thought of coming here, if you thought of going to one of these places, just think what you'd be out. And, but still, Illinois being the highest of the publics in this group is somewhat disturbing. Last group, which I don't think is a viable comparable, but it may be to some in the legislature. Because I don't know if you know this, first of all, not every state legislator has a college degree. Nothing wrong with that, but that is the fact. And not every one of them went here. You may think they did, but some of them went to some of these other schools. And so I don't think this is a fair comparison either. But that's what's on, that's what is reported. All right, let's look at what's going on with the state appropriation from 5 to 12, a long time period. The state operating appropriation has gone down, enrollment's gone up 8%, tuition and fees gone up 81% in this time. So very significant change there. Now, we talked briefly about the performance measures. You're about to be hit with those. They haven't been set up yet. These are the guidance for the metrics to be used by the legislature from Senate Bill 1503. We're supposed to ask, the legislature is supposed to ask the university, consider success of first-generation low-income students, differentiating missions of the different universities, relate to the goal of completion, which means graduation rates, and maintaining the quality, whatever that means. So they're definitely going in this direction. We just don't know exactly what the metrics are going to be. I think they're going to announce fairly soon. I think there's a committee they've announced already. No, go ahead. There's this committee there's the committee that was formed by the legislature that has smart people on it, I guess. There's supposed to be people representing from all the campuses that are on this. Have any faculty been asked? You guys are laughing. Well, it would be nice if they asked a faculty member, wouldn't it? Yeah. By the way, if you want faculty to be involved, get collective bargaining. That will give you that seat. That will ensure that faculty get asked. I think that's one way to do it. Total degrees conferred. This is a very raw measure, but I think you're going to see this kind of raw measure used. I was just at University of Minnesota about 3 weeks ago. They've already decided on their metrics, and this is one of them. I don't think there's a state I've been to that's not doing this. You guys Illinois is actually behind most of the other states. Most of the other states are either doing it or have done it or selected their metrics and they're about to do it. We'll see if they have the courage to go through with it, which means, when I mean courage to go through with it, cut somebody's appropriation because they don't have a high graduation rate or persistent rate. But you can see the degrees conferred have increased significantly. Now, what I have here are the graduation rates, okay? And if I go to the bottom, I don't have anything in the 6-year graduation rate here because the 2006 cohort, we don't know what that graduation rate is. I could say this, in general, this 4-year graduation rate is very impressive for a university this size. If we compare this to our peers, which I think we can do, I think this is probably higher than most of the peers in terms of the publics. Obviously, the privates are going to have a much higher graduation rate for the main reason being income. But notice that what I noticed about this, there is a decent difference between the 4 and the 5-year rate, which means there's a good number of students, maybe 1 out of 6, that are staying that 5th year to graduate. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the reasons is students are working more, there's financial pressures, et cetera. And notice how there's not very much of an increase between 5 and 6. So I think most of the students are getting out. And notice the increases. So this is what I meant before about quality. I can't, I mean, knowing the faculty here, the reputation of the faculty here, I don't think faculty are letting students slide. I don't think that's what's happening. I think what's happening is you're getting better students who may be taking a little longer than you would have when we were undergrads, but still, these are very impressive graduation rates. I think most impressive is the increase in the graduation rates. So I think between the degrees conferred and the graduation rate and these freshman retention rates, now it is a little low, this is still a pretty high freshman retention rate, 92.7. And I think overall, these are definitely pretty strong. One of the things they also may view is enrollment by race. More minority students you have, and then you could see that the university from 2001 to 2011, the Caucasian percentage has gone down significantly. There's a large increase, especially in international students here at the university, which obviously I think we're all for and adds a lot to the fabric of the university. And the university itself in their 12-13 budget book, they have these financial metrics here, which I won't get into, and then they have this picture of the way the budget works. I think I'm a fairly smart guy when it comes to accounting. I couldn't figure this thing out, and somebody can. I think what should be done is let's use some simpler metrics. Let's focus on reserves, debt, revenues, expenses, and cash flows, and let's look at what we're going to look at next. Percentage of the budget devoted to instruction, percent devoted to administration, and peer analysis on tuition and salaries. Let's do that. Now, I have a whole bunch of stuff on the state, and I'll just quickly give you the pictures. The state does not have the largest budget gap in the country. It has the 11th highest when we look at the 2012 budget gap, and this came from the Center of Budget and Policy Priorities. This is the fiscal 2012 year. Where does Illinois get their tax money from? You guys have a distribution that is 41% from income, 35% from sales. This is going to change a little bit as the income tax rate goes up. If I had Texas up here, quiz, what would be the percentage in the blue box? 0, A to B, people. There is no state income tax in Texas. So Rick Perry awaits you. Unbelievable. And so that's the way. Now, is Illinois a high-tax state? I think the answer is, right, they have this overall index right in the middle. So I don't think Illinois is a high-tax state at all. And we know, as we talked about, you raise taxes. Now, there is a pension issue here. The state is considering this bill. If you look at this bill, it's not pleasant. This bill talks about doing the things that have been done to us in Michigan and other states. A couple of things. Changing the way the average salary is created at the end of your career, which is the base of your pension. Increasing the amount you contribute. Not allowing new employees to have defined benefit plans where your benefit is set for your life as opposed to having a defined contribution plan. And I can tell you from her personal experience, defined benefit plans give us a lot more security than a defined contribution plan. And a lot of this is being discussed in Springfield. If you want voice in Springfield, right now the only voice you have is your administration. If you want faculty and student voice, then collective bargaining is the way to get it. That will give you that voice. And you want to be at the table when this is discussed. A lot of these changes are happening, but don't you want to be in the room? Don't you want to be in that room when those changes are discussed? And that's where it's all, I just want to be there. I'm not saying I'm going to hit somebody over the head and they get to listen to me, but at least I want to be there. I want to represent people so we could be there and talk about it. Now the state is looking better at some level. The state does a monthly revenue forecast. And look at this, it looks like, look at individual income taxes, 9 billion to 12 to 16, looks like the state's taking off. But wait a second, that 16 is because of the higher income tax rate. You've heard how some people think that when you lower income tax rates, you actually get more revenue. Well, we used to call that voodoo economics, but actually when you increase income tax rates, you actually get more revenue. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And that's what the state has forecast. And in fact, this little guy right here, this tells me the 2012 year to date, which is the first several months of this year, July, August, September, October, the first 4 months of this year, forecasts are just in line with expectations. So the university, I mean, the state is supposed to be doing better. Now, what about college grads? You guys have a lot of college grads in your state. Well, I mean, this is the appropriation per state, and it's pretty high. And as we'll see, that leads to higher, you have higher educational appropriation than the other, that per student, but as a percentage of revenue, you're kind of in the middle. You're kind of average. Is the state a high unemployment state? Yes and no. Yes, because it's greater than average. 10.1, the national average is 9. No, because it used to be worse. None of you were alive in February of 1983, so you don't remember. That recession kind of got papered over, but people think this recession is worse, and in some ways, yes. But that was the highest rate came in February of 83. I think a guy named Reagan was president then, I couldn't be sure. And this low rate came, I think the man was president then, but I'm not sure. And that'd be Bill. 10th highest unemployment rate in the state, and there we are at third. We were first for so long, and then we became second and third. We had parades all over Michigan. We were no longer first. Nevada is highest now. Now, how do you guys do versus the national average? You tell me what you think of that. Higher now, been higher, been lower, sort of middling. But I think what's got people most upset is what's called, the economists call this U6, Bureau of Labor Statistics. I don't know, any economic professors here? Not a one, huh? I guess I'll have to suffice. U6 is not the standard unemployment rate. Standard unemployment rate is people who are currently looking for work who don't have a job. U6 says, you know what? We're going to add people who have discouraged, people who have given up. They are no longer looking, and we're going to add people who are working part-time but want to work full-time. And what you get is a real unemployment rate of closer to 16, and here in the state of Illinois, it's 16.8. That means 1 out of 6 people are not working or not working the jobs they want, and that is really a problem. So, what was that? What was that? They didn't compute this then. This is a pretty new stat, and it's also done quarterly, but they didn't compute this number then. My guess is it would probably be a lot higher. But you know what? You know, in listening to the conversation, there's a lot more long-term unemployed now than there were then. People who are, that's why we're having this big argument in Washington about extending the unemployment benefits past 99 weeks. We didn't have that much of a problem with it. I think there's much more long-term unemployed and what we call structural unemployed now than there were back in that recession then. All right, let's talk about the expenses of the system. This is the expense distribution of the system. These categories here, okay? If you want to know, what is in instruction? What counts in research? What is public service? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slides of definitions, which obviously I will not bore you with here. But when you look at the presentation, you'll be able to define, you'll be able to see what is in these categories. Now, as I try to do comparison, this is the system itself, and we'll get to UIUC in a second. They didn't count fringe payments in 9 and 10. They put them all in the individual categories. Prior to 09, everything fringe was counted for separately. So that change makes it hard to compare. But compare we do, so I make 5 to 8 and 9 to 10. And the yellow categories are the mission, the orange ones are the most administratively tainted. I said that. Categories. And you see the category that increased the most at the system, and we'll see it here at UIUC, is academic support, deans, associate deans, assistant deans, and their salaries and their budgets, et cetera, et cetera. So I'll pass over all these definitions and look at UIUC. And this comes from iPads, and I'm comparing 5 to 10, 5-year comparison. And the good thing that we do with iPads is they're able to break out salaries and wages. Now, why do we do that? They added fringes in 09, which made comparison difficult to prior years. Plus, they started adding depreciation. They started adding facilities costs to instruction. So it makes it hard to compare years. So what we do have, the purest comparison we've got is salaries and wages. And that's what this is. This is just salaries and wages. And what's incredibly disturbing is this change right here. Salaries and wages for instruction. That's everybody who's teaching. 16.7% of total expenses. That's it, by the way. You think it's more than that. That's all it is. You add fringes, we'll see it's not that big. It's less than a quarter of the whole thing. It goes down to 14.2. And that's really It's really difficult to accept, and I think it needs to be explained. Percent change in salary component of various expenses 5 to 10 graphically. Academic support, gone up 70% in this time. Instruction's gone up the least. Academic support's gone up the most. I'm reporting this as is. This is the way they report it in iPads. I think this needs to be explained. There's been a commitment to research here. This is an incredible research institution, but that's gone up less than some of the other administrative-like categories. Institutional support is high level. Think Hogan. That's the president. So here, I'm shifting from iPads to the Orange Book to prove the same point. There's been a decline in the commitment to instruction and an increase in administrative costs. So it's somewhat different accounting constructs, different data sources, and we'll see the same results. So I got the same categories, and here are the numbers. And numbers by themselves, well, it's just a bunch of numbers. How about this? This is a little nicer to see. So I'll walk over if you don't mind, because I think this is pretty important. And this is instruction. This is for the budget. I won't bore you with that word is different than it is in these are expenditures and budget, not expenses. There's research going down a little. This is the academic support. So the same thing we saw on iPads we're seeing in the budget. And this, by the way, is going all the way to the current year we're in now, 2012. Some of this will be furloughs, but certainly not all of them. And it's pretty disturbing. This red line is incredibly disturbing. And it continues, as we'll see. Yeah.
I actually use the iPad at work, so I should know this. But if you have people helping you with computer support, which we all know has grown in the last few years, would that be categorized in instruction, or would it
Excellent question.
be categorized in academic support?
Let me tell you. Let me show you. That's a really good question. Look at this note, just looking at institutional support. Also includes information technology expenses related to institutional support activities. If an institution does not separately budget an expense, those costs, the IT costs associated with student services and operations, et cetera, will also be applied to this function. So the answer I'm going to give you is it depends. But your question is obviously, it merits, every definition ends with the same exact paragraph. I didn't put it, every definition in the iPad's expenses has this phrase in it. This set because it really can change things. That's why I think in looking at the broad categories, looking at salaries and wages I think is pure. You can't fake those. You can't allocate them differently. That last bullet point which you're asking about suggests that there are difficult issues, not everyone's handling them the same way. So all right. So which one? They have it in every one of them. It's in every single category. That same paragraph, I have it here in every one of them. So this is where we were. Now here are the percentage changes from 7 to 12. This is annual, okay? This gives you an annual. This gives you the endpoints. And the biggest increases were planned. Student aid, I think, appropriately so. But there's that academic support. Total expenses went up there, and look who's last again. Instruction. And I think the picture speaks for itself. And we'll have some more evidence in a second. Now, this has been going on nationally. The Delta Project, which, by the way, kind of ended this week, sad to say. I don't know if you guys saw that. The Delta Project are the ones that came out and said, too much administration, too much administration. They had a report in 10 saying that there's too much administration. They had a report in 11, which I have here. And then they announced November 28th, 3 days ago, basically, iPads is doing everything. We're now subservient to iPads, and that's the end of us, which is fine. I don't know what it's going to mean for us researchers on this stuff, but effective January 1st, 12, that's like yesterday. So the way we get and Delta had all this stuff out there, we used it. So it's a problem for us, but I thought it was pretty interesting. Ben Ginsberg did this report, and he called the explosion of Deanlets and Deanlings. And all right, this, if I could take anything home, this bothers me the most. If I could tell you what bothers me the most, The budget itself, the Orange Book itself, has two broad categories, basically academic stuff and administrative stuff. Now, I know that's a pretty raw and a pretty crude break, but that's the way the budget is broken out. And so, all academic colleges and programs, all administrative programs, and this is for UIUC only. So you can see, as a percentage, academic stuff was 62% of stuff in 7, 61% in 12. That may, oh, it's only down. It should never go down. It should never go down. And here, these two bars right here, as we look at the percentage change, the dollar change, so academic programs went up 270 million, the administration programs went up 194. These went up more, but percentage-wise, a 37% increase in administrative functions versus a 31% increase in academic programs. And that's the budget. That's just the budget. And I think that needs to be addressed and explained. And if you think I cherry-picked, I says, okay, maybe I cherry-picked. I picked 7 and 12. Let's just look at 11 and 12. Let's look at the last 2 years. Same thing. Now, it's not a big difference, but still, just looking from 11 to 12, just this last year, why are administration functions going up more than academic functions? Notice, by the way, how the budget's going up. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Increases are good. But this is, I don't see it. I don't see how that should happen. And I think these are the kind of metrics you should be taking to the administration. Now, again, find your college, find your curriculum, find your program, find your schooling here. What I've done here is look at the specific items in the academic budget. And I don't mean this column to say this column should be associated with this column. There's a lot of things besides enrollment that change. But I thought just showing you the change in enrollment, and by the way, the liberal arts change includes general studies. I put general studies back in terms of enrollment. You can see the percentage changes are very different by colleges. There's that 31%. And this 31%, just so you know, is, sorry, I'm going to get there. I promise I'm going to get there. That 31%. So that's a 31% increase in the academic side. And so this is showing me how we got there by looking at the curriculum, by looking at the different colleges. And, you know, in terms of, oh, they're getting better, they're getting worse. Again, to me, this is just information that I think you could have. Looking at specific items in the administrative budget, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Market driven, that's what we'll hear. Yeah. Faculty salaries you'll see are not market driven. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you leave me some time, I'll show you exactly where all the money comes from in athletics. I think athletics, you know, when they play football here, it says the University of Illinois. They are playing college football representing this university. It's not this separate fiefdom where they are self-sufficient and they're all off on their own. The goal is for the athletic department to be self-sufficient and not take a dime of money from the academic part. We'll see. I'll show you. I don't think that's entirely true. It's close, but not entirely true. They come close. Now, who's self-sufficient? I think Michigan and Ohio State are. In the Big Ten, I'll show you why Illinois is not. But it's not a huge drain, but we'll show you that it's some of a drain. Some top 20 administrative salaries, just positions, not names. That is going to be 2 next week. The head football coach. Every place I go, the football coach is the highest paid person. We could lament that. We could argue about it. I think we should. Is this right? I mean, come on. That's a lot of money. You can see down here the average salaries of these top 20 people have gone up significantly. A lot of zeros, though, from 10 to 11. Got some help with these numbers here. I'll let you look at that. Some technical notes. There were 8 people for which I did not have 3 years of data, so I didn't put them in the other thing. Now, Harriet mentioned this study that's on the CFA site, and these are some excerpts from that study. The number of people who call themselves deans, and it's part of the academic support line. You can see an increase in the number of deans, and the salaries of these deans have gone up as well. From 6 to 12, the salaries have gone up 21%. Much higher than the faculty salaries, as we'll see. All right, we're in the home stretch. We're on slide 117, by the way, in case you were wondering. So yes, we are getting through this thing. All right, this comes from the University Office of Planning and Budgeting. There's something called the University of Illinois FTE staffing trend. FTE stands for full-time equivalent. And they break down, these are the main categories that they have. Faculty, administrative/professional, civil service, graduate assistant, and campus total, number of employees. And so the number changed from here to here, the percentage changed from here to here. Faculty basically flat. Almost a 20% increase in administrative/professional. Civil service and graduate assistant down. And I think this is a startling growth. And so is all that administrative growth professional, which we'll look at in a second. So let me go right here. Here's some more detail on the faculty. So this is the faculty, and this comes from, I'm using slightly different dates. This comes from the UIUC Division of Management Information, like institutional research, comparing 7 to 12. Now, why you don't have the same exact numbers that are on the staffing trends, don't get me started, but we'll have that discussion another day. Professors, associate assistants. This, to me, if you ask me what bothers you more than anything, it's this, the decline in the number of assistant professors. Assistant professors provide new blood, new ideas. It's not like you're not hiring assistant professors, but not at the same rate. Obviously, a lot of them what happens? They get promoted. We're down with that. But what happens to some of the full professors? I hate to say this, but some of them retire. Some leave. Some even die. This all happens. And so the numbers are not just switching around. Full professors down. Associates up a little, relatively flat. 25% drop in the number of assistant professors from 2007 to the present time. Even visiting faculty are down, but of course postdocs are up. And I don't need to tell you what that means. And just looking at those three categories, just stare at this. It's a pretty simple graph. Number of assistant professors, full associates. Not very pleasant. And I think it needs to be addressed. So are you guys getting paid more, though? Well, let's see. This is the peers. This is, I heard, we hear aspirational peers. These are the peers that IBHE uses as your peers. These are them. Now, I went to a couple of these places. I went to Penn Chicago, wonderful places. But last time I looked, they were private schools. And a lot of these are both private and public. So here you guys are. Total compensation. This all comes to AAP salary survey. A couple I hadn't even iPad for some of the ones because we didn't have AAP numbers for every one of them. But 18 to 21, 21 to 21, 19 to 21. What IBHE does on their site is they give average. They give an average of the three. Faculty salary should always be analyzed by rank. You shouldn't analyze. You should always analyze by rank, not combining into one. They do a job. They try to adjust the average by the number of faculty, but why not just do this? This includes health benefits, retirement benefits, etc. These are means. So, by the way, when I look at the mean and mean salary data, at some places the mean is dragged up by some, and a little bit of that's here. Now, this is, let's just take a little time in this. This is the peer mean without UIUC. In 2005-06, the average full professor of your peers is 1.71. You guys see we're $10,500 below. Right? Fast forward 5 years, you're now $20,900 below. That to me seems like a moving rank. Ranking-wise, you went from 16 to 18. Associate professors lost even more. 6,000 behind, 15,000 behind, went from 17th rank down to last rank. Assistants lost 5,000 more, went from 14th rank to 19th rank. I think it's clear that they're losing considerable growth for first-year peers, and it's not just the private peers, it's also some of the public peers. It certainly is not faculty salaries that's driving tuition increases. There's the tuition increase, there's that academic support category, dean salaries, and you see some of the professor salaries going up less. and total instructional salaries going up even less than all of that. Class size. There's something called a common data set, also required by the U.S. Department of Education. What it does is it says, okay, how many sections do you have that have that many students, that many students, that many students, etc. And I compared the two end years, the most recent year and the farthest away year they had on the website. The number of sections in 2005 was 6,741 total sections. Here, again, it's all UIUC. And almost, look at that, it's almost the exact same number of sections. Notice how the smaller classes, we have decreases, and we have increases in the larger classes. So, 100 plus. We had 319 such sections in 2005. Now we have 396 such sections in 2011, with the same number of total sections. 50 to 59, gone up from 390 to 494, 104 more such sections. Now, the small sections, I mean, there's some disciplines, piano, some of the other disciplines where you have to have small classes, but there's been 173 fewer of those in 2011 than in 2005. This is undergraduate only. This is undergraduate only. Yes? Well, let's look, that's what this is. Okay, this is the percentages. This is the answer to your question. The percentage of the total. So you can see there's fewer of these, not so much here, but that is a decline, and those are increases. So I think there is definitely a shift in class size here. There's no doubt about it that this represents a positive shift in class size. I don't know if you felt that or not. So there you go. All right, look at that. We still got 10 minutes to go. We haven't touched sports. You guys ready for some sport? Ready to play some football? That's what I'm talking about. All right. You didn't think I'd get through this, did you? Here we go. There's 19 sports being played at this university. 508 student athletes out of 31,000 undergraduates. Less than 2% of the student athletes are involved. And I'm sure many of you have student athletes in your classes, and in many cases, many of them outperform the student body. They get a lot of help, but I think, especially in what's called the Olympic sports, especially on the female side, they strongly outperform the student body as a whole. Female student athletes universally outperform student body as a whole. That's always been the case, and there's reasons for that. There's two big data sources, both really coming from the same place. Again, U.S. Department of Education, called Equity in Athletic Data Analysis. And USA Today is on a mission, for lack of a better term. They are on a mission about college sports spending. They are not in cahoots with the NCAA at all. In fact, the NCAA is not very happy with what they're doing. They've done data requests after data requests, and they really have a very rich database, which we'll see in a second. But just to show you, athletics is in the whole thing. Again, this is going back to 2010, the most recent year before we have data. Athletics, because remember, the budget was $79 million. The 12 budget athletics is 79. Well, 72. 2 years later, 79. A couple of 5% increases or so get you there. Salaries, total salaries instruction. So this is if I add everybody who teaches plus their benefits. 22% of the whole thing. That's all we are. But if I asked you this on the way in, you guys all would have told me that number's like 80. It's 22% of the whole thing. And that's everything. That's all the instructional salaries and benefits. Athletics is 4.4. Now, I don't know how you feel about sports. I'm a big sports fan, not a big college sports fan, growing up in New York, but we all have different feelings about it. I still think we need to ask questions. So these are, we're going to get to the revenue items in a second. These are the different expense items that are listed, and they're not 71 million. It was 47 million 5 years ago. Comparing 5 to 10, a 24 million or 50% increase in athletic spending from 2005 to 2010. Administrative salaries and benefits. That's the athletic director and all those people who blow balloons at halftime and all that kind of crap. 36%. Coaching salaries and benefits, 40%. Direct facilities. They may have had a couple of new buildings to play sports around here. Who knows? So these guarantees, by the way, this is when you guys pay a lower level school like mine to come in and beat them up in football. You guys do that a couple times a year? Didn't you start out? You started out really good in football this year, right? That's because you paid for it. You literally, not figuratively, literally pay for it. You also get them on the other side. You get revenue, sometimes you get them on the other side. You do like a 2-for-1, maybe a school in Arizona, something like that, and they'll pay you, if you go to Arizona to play football, they'll share some of the gate with you. Or go to play Oregon, they'll share some of the gate with you. So it does cut both ways. Here are the salaries and context. Just to throw this out there. This is the average men's head coach. There's only 9 of them. This does include the big ones, but football and basketball, they do count. The average men's assistant coach, that's a big number there. Average full professor, again, it's all UIUC, by the way. Average women's head coach, average associate, average assistant, women's assistant, and the average lecturer. I took 2 departments. One, English, because my good friend Carrie works there, or used to work there, so I took English. That's a low number, I'm sorry. You guys do a lot of grading, I imagine, and that's not a high number. And this, we have 2 special needs kids at home, so I looked at special ed, the average lecturer in special ed makes $39,000. That's all it is. So take that for what it's worth. And here are where are they getting their money from? Where's the university getting for athletics? Ticket sales. This one here, student fees, every dollar for the undergraduate students, a percentage of the student fees is going to athletics, whether they like it or not. Now, as I'm told, it gives them free access to a beautiful rec center. It probably gives them discounted tickets to football and basketball. They don't have to pay full price. Like if I walk in off the street to watch a basketball game here, I assume I have to pay like $20. The students get to pay, I'm assuming, I have to pay more than $20? I ain't paying. No offense, you guys aren't that good. Well, you had that coach that went to, you were good when you had the guy that went to Kansas. Didn't you have the guy that went to Kansas? Bill Self, didn't he coach here? Oh, did he win here? Okay, had he won since he left? All right, so this one right here, the conclusion that athletics is not self-supporting. This one and this one. This one comes from the students. This direct institutional support, the way USA Today describes it, is general fund contribution. That's the way USA. Now, that's not a big number. That's really not a big number out of 70-something million. 1 million is a very small number. But I'll show you in a second why that's the case versus some of the other big